What does Judaism say about shadim, or about demons? In this week's parasha, in Parashas Acharei Mos, we have a pasuk that says as follows. The context of the pasuk is that we are going to bring our karbanis hektish. We're going to shecht specifically in the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash. We're not allowed to do shchutei chutz. We're not allowed to bring these outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And in that context, we have the pasuk that's number 1 on your sheet, where it says, "V'lo yizbechu oida zivcheim," and no longer will you make your karbanis la seirim, to the seirim asher him zoinim achareim, that they are falling, that they are straying after. This is a very interesting pasuk. What is this seirim? We know many times the Torah says that no avodah zarah. We don't want avodah zarah. We're against avodah zarah. What's avodah? Avodah zarah typically is where you worship the sun, you worship the moon, you worship the winds, you worship the rain, you worship all these phenomena of nature, along with the fact that you would make a physical statue to represent some of these powers, and this is called avodah zarah. Here we're getting something else. There's seirim. Seirim is not avodah zarah. So what is this? Seirim? So the Sifra right away says al asar. The Sifra is a teres koinim, is a medrash where Chazal say ein seirim elas sheitim. You want to know what seirim are? Seirim are called sheitim. Shenamar. This is as it says in the pasuk. Useirim yeraktu sham. This pasuk is in Yeshaya, and in Yeshaya it's talking about the downfall of Babylonia, of Bavel, and it says that the houses are going to be laid waste, and the cities are going to be in ruins, and there's going to be animals roaming in the streets, and then it says, Useirim Yeraktu Sham, that there's going to be Seirim, which we now know, the Sifra is telling us that this is Shadim, that are going to be hanging out there. Why? We all heard of the concept of a haunted house, where if no one's living there, so then demons are going to come to live there. I don't see the Shenemar as a raya. In other words, I don't see how you prove from the pasuk that Seirim means Shadim. But I just think what they mean is Seirim means Shadim, just like there it means Shadim. Just like there it means Shadim in Yeshaya, so too here it means Shadim. So here we're learning another concept, and that is a different form of idolatry. One form of idolatry is Avodas Kechavim in the typical sense. Another form of Avodas Kechavim, of idolatry, is to bring a carbon to Shadim, to demons. This is a different type of idolatry, also forbidden. And what the Torah is saying in Acharei Mos is that God wants to wean Jews off of this. As Even Ezra is going to say, we'll see in a minute, the Jews in Mitzrayim, not only did they do idolatry, they also did demon worship. And to get them off demon worship, there's a whole bunch of rules, and one of those rules is no shechting kachim outside the Beis Hamikdash, because then it's not controlled, and who knows what you're going to do. Maybe you're going to bring it for idolatrous purpose or for demonic purposes, but you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and you do it in the confines of those four walls with the kohen, then we have it under control, and that's the context of the pasuk v'lo yizbechu oid la seirim. Now, why are they called seirim? Seirim sounds like goats or hare. What does this mean? So Even Ezra says as follows. V'nikru kain, they're called seirim bavur sheyistair haguf haroya oisam. The funny thing is that we're not entirely sure what Even Ezra means by the word sheyishtair. I saw some people say he means here meloshen sar, meloshen here, meaning you get so, when someone encounters him, he's so afraid that his hair stands up. Some people think that. Others think that it's meloshen sar as in a storm. That just like you're afraid of a storm, so too a person, the body is afraid of these beings. Okay, so that would be the explanation for why they're called seirim. But then he goes on and says another explanation. More reasonable to me is bavur sheyirum hamishugoyim kidmus seirim. Because people who are mishuga, people who are a little off, not all with it, when they see demons, they see them and they look like goats. And so this is why we call them like this. And as I pointed out, he points out here that the pasuk is saying that in Mitzrayim, in other words, they used to in Mitzrayim, they used to do this type of worship, and now we want to wean them off of this. Okay, now in our terminology, the language we use is not seirim. We usually say shadim. That's what Chazal called it. So the Ramban explains on this pasuk over here that shadim is melashim shadud, which means wild. And that's because they live in the wild. That's what Ramban says. Shemishkanam b'makom shadud. Kegoin hamidbar, they live like in the desert. V'ikar mitziyusam b'ksavais, and they live in the extremes. Kegoin pa'as safan, like all the way at the North Pole. This is what Ramban is saying, why they're called shadim in the wild. Okay, those are two names. Now there's another name that they go by. So far we have Se'irim, we have Sheidim. The other name that Chazal use is Mazikin. And this goes all the way back to the Mishnah. If you look in Pirkei Avos Perek, it says as follows: 10 things, and it lists the 10 things, and then it says, and some people say, Af HaMazikin. So there's a man that says, Af HaMazikin, and then the classic commentary of Reb Shimon ben Samach Duran, Magen Avos, one of the Rishonim, he lived in the 1300s, he writes, Elo HaSheidim, this is the Sheidim. Mazikim refers to Sheidim. And he goes on to explain what is the meaning that they were created Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos. What the Mishnah here is trying to accomplish is the fact that if you look at the Asar Mamaros, if you look at the first chapter of Bereshis, you see Hashem creates everything every day. You don't see God saying, and there should be Sheidim. So where did it happen? When did it happen? So therefore, the Mishnah is saying it happened at the last second, Bein Hashmashos. This is how the Magen Avos explains what's happening in this Medrash. Another name, so that's 3 names. Se'irim, Sheidim, Mazikim. Another name that gets introduced by the Mekubalim is Chisoinim. That's another name that gets used. So scary are these beings that we're all familiar with the fact that some people don't even say the word Shay. They would say the word Shin Dalet, and that's because they don't want to even say the word, as if either that causes too much negative emotion, or for a fear that you're maybe calling them and then maybe they're going to respond or something like that.
Right, so Se'irim and what's called, and Sheidim, you need to explain why it was called. Mazikim is Pashut Mazik, right?
Yeah, exactly, because these are harmful beings. Okay, now, so the reality is that one who learns the Safros Chazal from the Gemara, starting from the Mishnah and the Gemara, Bavli, Yerushalmi, the Midrashim, and all through the generations, we find an acceptance, 100% acceptance that they exist, that these beings exist. The Torah is saying you're not allowed to worship them. Okay, but the concept exists. These beings exist. The Torah says you're not allowed to worship the sun. Okay, the sun exists. Okay, that's how this was usually understood. Now, even if it's understood in this way, even as it's understood in this way, it was quickly pointed out that why it doesn't make sense to worship these beings. So we're going to go to the Ramban in this week's Parsha, and he invokes a pasuk from Parshas Hazinu that also speaks to Yizbechu LaSheidim Lo Eloha, that they bring karbanis to Sheidim, and what's the meaning of Lo Eloha? So the Ramban brings from Targum Onkelos a non-literal interpretation, that it means the lays behind tzroich, you have no need for them, which is not what Lo Eloha means. You have no need for them. And the Ramban goes on to explain as follows: these beings have no power. They only could do things that God tells them to do. So there's no point in talking to them or pleading with them. The only thing maybe, he says, a human being can gain from them is that they know the future, but not distant future, only the immediate future. So 5 minutes before something happens, they know about it. So in theory, a person, if they knew how to communicate with these mazikin, they could maybe hear what's going to happen in 5 minutes. But if you're going to hear what's going to happen in 5 minutes, how's that going to help you? Usually, you need more time in order to know how to plan your life. So therefore, they really are of no help to anyone. And he explains that Lo Eloha means they're not a power. Elokim means power. And he says that Elokim is made up of 2 words, Kael, Haim. And the Ale part of the word is power. And Haim is them. It's like El Haim. They have power. That's what Elokim, Shem Elokim means. And God is the ultimate power. There are other powers. That's why we call judges. We sometimes call them Elokim. We call angels, could sometimes be called Elokim. Human beings are created B'Tselem, Elokim. Elokim is a word that could be used when an entity has power. They have absolutely no power, and that's what Onkelos means when he says, lace behind Sroich, that you have no need, you have no benefit. In other words, they exist, yeah, but there's absolutely no reason for worship of them because it's not going to gain you anyway, which is why the Torah is saying that we should stay far away from them. Okay, so this is pretty much what I would say is the classical position on these types of forces as it is presented in Safros Chazal. However, the reality is that there are a number of Rishonim, and we start seeing this perhaps at the end of the Tkuf of the Goyim, and then in the Rishonim, who were uncomfortable with this whole phenomenon. And the truth is that this is really part of a broader topic, some of which we've touched on in previous classes. So, for example, astrology, which we spoke about last year, or I think it was last year, or Ayin Hara is another one. And communicating with dead people. Whatever, there's a whole bunch of these things that will fall under the general umbrella of some people just call it paranormal phenomenon. Some people will call it superstition, which is like a little bit more of a judgmental type of term. And generally we find that in Chazal, there's an acceptance of these teachings, and very often. And the Rishonim, we see some of them, not all of them, they're not so comfortable about it. So let's look at some of those sources of the Rishonim and let's see what their hesitations are. Yeah.
So far, what was the earliest mention of Shadim clearly?
Well, Se'irim is mentioned clearly in the Torah. Yizbechu.
No, but I'm saying, when's the earliest interpretation of that to mean?
The word Shadim appears in Parshas Hazinu. Yizbechu la Shadim, that they're slaughtering sacrifices to Shadim.
And over there, how is it interpreted?
Yeah, so it's understood. Everyone understands that it's raising sacrifices to demonic forces. The question is if they're real or not.
What the number is we're talking about in Shadim?
L'Shadim, the lace behind Sroich. L'Shadim, the lace behind Sroich. But if you want to go look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah has mazikin. It talks about mazikin, and it's pretty clear what those mean, unless you're going to interpret it metaphorically. So in other words, you always, you know what I mean? The first one could always be interpreted to mean something else, so I'm not sure. Okay, so let's look, I would do the question the other way. Who's the first one to say he doesn't really accept the concept that there are shadim that exist? I think that would actually be more helpful. The default is probably yes, and then you say, who's the first one who says no? Okay, so we're going to look, I didn't set it up chronologically. First, we're going to look at the Radak. The Radak has a commentary on this week's Parsha, on Parshas Achrei Mos. L'Seirim, he says, Heim HaShedim. He agrees that Seirim means Shedim. However, so Rav David Kimchi lives in the 1200s, the generation after the Rambam, and he lived in Provence, that's between Spain and France. And in this place, in Provence, this is an area where Jews are more of a philosophic bent. They're more into learning Hakira, and I think unlike the Jews in Ashkenaz, who are more just focused on Gemara and the like. So Radak writes a commentary that's very famous on Aviyim Uksuvim, but he wrote other works. He wrote a dictionary, and he wrote a Pirush on Torah as well. So he writes, L'Seirim Heim HaShedim. He agrees, and by the way, everyone agrees that Seirim is the Shedim. But then he writes, Sheni Kroin Kach. They're called like this because they look like goats for the people who believe in them. In other words, what's he saying? He's implying pretty strongly that he doesn't accept that these things exist. The Torah is the way he understands it is the Torah is telling you don't worship something that doesn't exist because they're not there. Okay, that's what the Radak say. They're called Seirim because human beings, the Torah is Dibra Torah Klashim Bnei Adam, human beings who believe in them think they look like Seirim, so the Torah uses that type of language. This is Radak. Now, here you go a little bit more, a psychological way, a very interesting psychological insight from the Ralbag. Ralbag is a generation after Radak in the same place, Levi ben Gershon. He also wrote a long commentary on Tanakh, and it was very interesting with his commentary is that at the end of each chapter, not literally chapter, but each section, he writes what's called Hatoy Elios, and that is the benefits. Like, what do we gain? Like the Hoirah B'Poyol that we gain from this. And I'll list like 30 things that we learn from each parak, from each chapter in the Torah. So he too was from Provence. He too was, he wrote philosophical works. He wrote a book called Mechamas Hashem that's like on Hashkafa issues. Some things are controversial there. Okay, so this is Ralbag. By the way, there's a crater on the moon named for him because there's also like astronomy stuff that he was involved in. And so when they were naming craters for the moon, there are two Jews who have craters in the moon named for them. One is Ralbag Levi ben Gershon, and the other is Rabbi Avram Zakusa, who wrote Svarim, who's from later, from the 1400s. Okay, that's just random facts.
They call it the Ralbag?
Jewish root, the Gersonides. His English name is Gersonides, like Maimonides, the Levi ben Gershon. So his name is Gersonides, but maybe it's called the Levi crater. I don't remember. You could check after. Maybe it's called a Levi crater. I don't remember. Okay. So he says like this. The whole concept of a demon is all fantasy. Oh, go back. Go away from 10. Go to 9. Look at number 9. The Gemara here is talking about demons. There are if you were to collect all the teachings about Shadim and Talmud Bavli, you have a book. Okay? Now, says the Gemara. If it sees one person, it actually doesn't say it. It's saying it from the human's perspective. Le'echad, for one person, nira umazik, the demon appears and it hurts. Lishnayim, to 2 people, nira, it shows up, it appears, but it doesn't hurt you. Lishloisha, to 3, nira kol iker, it doesn't show up at all. Okay, now, how are you supposed to understand that? Why would be that difference? So I guess the normal way to interpret this would be that demons are scared. So if it's 1, they feel that they have the right to attack. If it's 2, they'll be comfortable to come out. It's like, the rats over here. It depends on the amount of people. Depending on the number of people. If you brought 100 people here, they would all run away, right? So that's the pashtus way of understanding it. But the Rambam, with a little bit of a more psychological perspective, says as follows: the whole thing is just phantom. It's not real. That's what Chazal were saying when they said it depends on the number of people. If there was an objective truth that these beings existed, then it would be the same. Why would it be different? 3, 2, and 1. Elamai, how is he understanding it? You're walking alone in the desert. What happens when you're alone? And it's dark, and you're afraid, and you're falling, you get jumping, you're all scary. So le'echad nire umazik. I don't know exactly how we tied you umazik. L'shnayim, did we see something? I think we saw something, whatever. 3 people, you're walking in the wilderness, you feel good, comfortable, you never saw anything. So his argument is that even Chazal, he's patching a Chazal, which we read as endorsing the existence of Shadim, and him saying that Farketa is proving Punkt Farketa. Now, go to Number 11. Now you have the question. And the question that we need to deal with is, okay, I just told you I have a whole book of teachings of Shadim in the Talmud Bavli. So here, good, he twisted 1. Very good. What are you going to do with all the rest of them? So there are 2 approaches that would be possible here. And the Meiri gives us both of these approaches. The Meiri also is from Provence, from the same exact time period, also the 1300s. So you're seeing already the influence that the time and place of a person's birth has an influence on their thinking. And Reb Menachem Meiri, and he wrote a long pirush on the Torah, a beautiful pirush on the Gemara called Beis HaBchira. That's the name of his commentator. Interestingly, it was only printed for the first time. Like the first volumes were printed in the late 1700s, and then some were printed into the 1900s. So it wasn't well known. Not so many people knew about this pirush. But he's going to give us 2 models for how to deal. He is not going to want to accept the fact that demons exist. So what is he going to do? So look what he says on the Mishnah. What's he going to do? This is a metaphor. Which is, in one way or another, is essential for sustaining the world. Basically, the way he explains this Mishnah is that the things that are created bein hashmoshes, those things are crucial for the world to function, either mitzad nature, tava, or mitzad they provide an important concept for Jews to believe in. So his argument is going to be the Yetzer Hara is crucial, pasha mitzad tava, and so therefore it was created bein hashmoshes. Now, why is Yetzer Hara crucial mitzad hatava? So he brings a famous medrash of Bereshis Rabbah that says, "Vayar elikim es kol asher asa," and God saw all that He made. V'hinei tov ma'od. So the medrash darshan is like, "V'hinei tov is Yetzer tov. Tov ma'od." God said it was very good. What's very good? Yetzer Hara. Frek the medrash, Yetzer Hara is very good. Etma. How could you say something like that? And the medrash answers, if not the Yetzer Hara, a man wouldn't marry, wouldn't build a house, and wouldn't raise a family. This is what it says. In other words, a person needs to have a little bit of an impulse, instinct about selfishness and pleasure that allows a person to pursue these, that pushes a person to pursue these things. Huh?
Do stuff without thinking.
To do stuff without thinking? Oh, okay.
You're ready, you're right.
Anyway, so that's why it's created Ben Hashmashis, because Ben Hashmashis, it's central. And then he says, this is mazikim. What's mazik? It's also a mazik. Why? Because the same Yetzer Hara that does wonderful thing and perhaps pushes us to get married and build a house, you know what it also does? It pushes us into addiction, it pushes us into negativity, it pushes us into depression, it pushes us into these terrible things. Mazik, pushing mazik. So it's both. It's both. And that's why he says, so this is how he's understanding this means. This is a derech. You're all familiar with this derech. And this is when, and this comes up in this conversation all the time. These are the shoinim. They'll just metaphorize a text in the Talmud, and they'll say, no, that's not what it means. It's a metaphor for something else. This is a textbook example of saying mazikim here means the personal mazik, the Yetzer Hara. And likewise, you could start doing that passage by passage by passage in the Gemara. You could start doing it to that as well. But Meiri also gives us another approach for how to deal with this. This
Gemara somewhere like if you want to see them, you put out the dust.
Yeah. The Gemara in Gittin, in Misha Achazai, it's the 7th Perek, I think, or 6th. I don't remember. There's a Perek in Gittin. It has a lot of pages about dealing with this stuff.
How would they interpret that metaphorically? Each
one you would have to deal with separately. I didn't think before this year. How would you do it? But I'm sure it could be done. Or you do the second approach. Let's do the second approach. What's the second approach? We're coming from Pesach now. Pesach we do the Arba Koises. Arba Koises, the Gemara, there's a big problem with Arba Koises. The Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara says, you crazy? Arba Koises? Don't you know about the problem of zugos, pairs? What's the problem with pairs? Basically, there's a sugya in Gemara in Pesachim where it discusses that Shadim, they are attracted to pairs. If they see something happening in pairs, they start going crazy and they're coming for you. Whereas if you're doing it in odd numbers, for how, why, what, where, but this is what you have over there in the Gemara. And the Gemara therefore says a person shouldn't eat two things. So example, don't eat 2 grapes. Eat 3 grapes. It also says don't. The Gemara over there says don't drink 2 cups. Drink 3 cups. And by the way, the assumption of the Gemara is that if 2 is a problem, 4 is a problem, and 6 is a problem, and 8 is a problem. That it continues. Then it says even when someone is cleaning themselves in the restroom and they're doing their action of cleaning, don't do 2 swipes. Do 3. Do 3. This is what the Gemara says. And then it speaks about a man engaging in marital relations. So if he has the ability, he shouldn't do it twice in one evening, because that's not good either. Fine. So this is what you have the Gemara. And so, how could you have the Dalet Kaisis? Why is this okay? Why is this permitted? It's a sakana. It's pasha sakana. So it answers, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Kra, Leil Shimurim. Leil Shimurim. What's Leil Shimurim? Torah says, Eibusher says, that the night of Pesach is Leil Shimurim. Shimurim, what is Shimurim? Guarding. What is guarding? Leil HaMeshumur Ubamin HaMazikin. It's a night that is guarded from Mazikin, which we know they're Shadim. In other words, you don't have to worry about Zugas on the night of Pesach, because they're anyway not going to come after you, and so therefore it's not a problem. Gemara gives other answers, but this is the first answer. In terms of Leil Shimurim, there's 2 interpretations of what Leil Shimurim is. One interpretation is Leil Shimurim means that God designated Shimurim Eloshin when he designated, like it says by Yaakov Avinu, v'aviv shamar es hadavar, like he designated this this night as a night for redemption, and that's the view that says B'Nissen Mashiach is going to come. If you hold the view that Nissen Mashiach is going to come, so then you touch Leil Shimurim is that it's the designated time for Mashiach. What if you hold that Tishrei Mashiach is going to come? One of the views, or Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shua argue. What if you say Tishrei Mashiach is going to come? How do you understand Leil Shimurim? Leil Shimurim this. Leil Shimurim Avamin HaMezikin, that we're not going to be hurt. By the way, this is the minhagim today. Follow both views. What do I mean? Follow both views. The fact that we have a lot of Mashiach imbued into our Seder, in the way we speak about it in the Haggadah, and that we have a Kosher Elio expecting he should show up, and that we open the door and expecting to see him there. All of that is the minig of that we're anticipating the Gula. The minig of not saying Krishma, Shalamita, other than saying just Shema, is because Leila Mashur Brahman and Mezikin. So let me take a moment to pause here and talk about Krishna Shalamita. Krishna Shalamita is not one thing. There are at least 3 or 4 things that are going on in the Krishna Shalamita. One Inyan is Pasha Shema Yisrael, Achtas Hashem, and Nachamal. You said it by mind, say it again right before you go into sleep. What better way to end your day with Shema? That's one big part of it. Another part is the mechila part before you go into sleep. This comes from later, from the mekubalim. You might as well, your neshama should be ba'achtos with other neshamas. You shouldn't be in a fight with anyone, so there's an union of mechila. Then there's vidui. There's a whole vidui part. And the tshuva part, and that is I did things that were wrong during the day. So, and that's where the cheshvan hanefesh concept is related to the vidui part. Yavar shamnu. Some people say al-chet. There's the onshim, all that stuff. The kapitel tilim of Perek Nun of David and Nasan Hanavi, Kasher Ba, Bashava. It's all about tshuva. So that's another thing. Then there's a whole theme within Krishma Shalamita that is about protecting from negative forces. The protecting from negative forces, which is why we say like 2 times or 3 times. These are what we call alachash. Alachash, these are empowering statements that somehow have a magical ability to keep things away. So you have that, like Yoshe B'Seiser. Yoshe B'Seiser is all talking about God guarding us from negative forces. That's what the whole Yoshe B'Seiser is saying, which is why it's also said by the Levaya. So in other words, that whole other element is there. So the Shmira of Mazikin is not necessary, which is why and Tachrun anyway is not necessary, so that's why Krishna Shalamita on the night of Pesach gets reduced all the way down to this specific thing. Okay, so this is the background to our passage from Meiri, because Meiri doesn't like the concept of zugos, because he doesn't like the concept of shadim. So what does he do? What does he say? He says over here, very interesting passage. Bekama makoymes biyarnu. On numerous occasions we've explained that in Talmudic times, the people would follow popular things. Kill that's a lachash, that's like when you whisper something and it is able to have that ability. Vin nechoshim, that's general superstitions. Upu'uliyes hamoinius, and general things that the masses are doing. Now, what's Chazal's reaction going to be? What's Chazal's reaction going to be? Says he, if there wasn't an issue, if there was an issue of, there's idolatry here. There's a bet. If you believe that, then it could lead to a false belief or something like that. Then Chachamim are going to fight it. But if there's no Avodah Zarah involved, if there's there's nothing harmful in it, the Chachamim didn't want to fight that war. It's choose your battles. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to say I want to take this away. And of these things, the people, general society used to be careful of pairs. So when the Chachamim said you have to do 4 cups, they didn't want people to do 3 or 5. Okay, it's interesting because there is a concept of a koisa chamishi. Okay, but they didn't want people to do 3 or 5. So because the people were so used to not doing things in pairs, so so they had to justify it. So in other words, and that's why they said, so what's he saying here? The Chachamim really, when they were sitting amongst themselves in their room, they said, Shaitan, what are you talking about? The whole thing doesn't exist. Then they came out to the people, and all the people believe in it. So now what are you going to do? You're going to laugh at them? You're going to lose them. You're going to lose them. So what do? You say, don't worry. Why? Because whether it's true or not, it's a very interesting insight in terms of, chinuch, in terms of how you deal with chinuch. When you're raising a child, this type of thing is also important in terms of what we say what we say no. No? Yeah. So this comes up for all these. This comes up for many of these things. So this is a different perspective. The first perspective was take a chazal and say it's a metaphor. This is a different perspective. No. Chazal did it. It's not a metaphor. They said it. They didn't really believe it, but they said it, and this is his way of dealing with it. Okay, now we come to the Rambam, because the Rambam, his name has been lacking, and usually any time we get into a conversation about paranormal phenomena, we always have to come to the Rambam, because the Rambam speaks very strongly about these issues and these concerns. So, in Mishnah Torah, there are any din in the Gemara, I'll just say it this way, any din in the Gemara, and we have many dinim in the Gemara, that relate to a demon. For example, don't walk into an abandoned building because of a demon. Or the din is, if you heard a shofar from a pit, is it possible that a demon blew it? There's a whole bunch of din. If someone said, give a get to my wife, how do you know it's a person? Maybe it's a demon. So all these things are halachic issues. Rambam, when he brings the din, he just brings the din there's no mention of demons when he talks about it. And that's one. But I want to look at something more specific, and we'll look at how he interprets a Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Eruvin discusses the following problem. It says it's not a problem. The Gemara the Gemara in Eruvin says as follows: Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said, All those years that Adam Arishan was punished by Hashem, meaning after the Chet Eitzadas, he gave birth to Ruchin, or Ruach. That's another term for Shaidim, by the way, is Ruach Ra. Something we learned, that there's a concept of Ruach Ra. It's definitely part of that same sugya. V'Shaidim, we know what that is. V'Lilin. The Lilin is a name of another demon. I don't know specifically why the Gemara mentions these three here. I don't know. So Adam Arishan was giving birth to demons. Shenamar, because the pasuk says, "Vaychi Adam shloisha ma'ashana." He lived 130 years. Vayoled b'dmusay kitzamai, and then he gave birth. B'dmusay kitzamai, he gave birth to someone who's b'tzelem, who's similar to him. Mechlal implied that adeina lav kitzamai. Till then, they weren't similar to Adam. Here, he's introducing the following idea. According to Chazal, Cain and Hevel were conceived and born before Chet Eitzadas. How do you make that work in the few hours between Adam and Chava's birth and the Chet Eitzadas? I don't know. But this is what you have. The Gemara says that happened first. So they're pre-sin. Then you have the sin. Now Adam Arishan is punished. During this long tkufa, Adam Arishan continues having children. These children are not Kedmusay V'Tzalmai. What are they? They're demons. Then he gave birth to Shais many years later, and Shais is Kedmus V'Talmai. Then it was already a normal person. Okay, the Rambam has a passage in Gemara Nevuchim where he discusses this, and he basically explains as follows.
Who was giving birth to them? Chava?
It's not clear in the Gemara.
Doesn't it say that there was another woman before Chava?
Yes, there is a whole sugya on Lilith that relates to this, and we can do a separate class on Lilith. A very interesting topic. Okay, now there's a Rambam in Gemara Nevuchim who basically explains this passage as follows. He says, you have people who are intelligent, Gedichte Menschen, they use their brains, they're intelligent, and they make good choices. So that's a person who's similar to Adam Arishan. Okay, Adam Arishan, after the Chet, he had many children, but these were no goodniks. They were low lice. And he said, and they're worse than animals. He said, why? Because an animal, at the end of the day, doesn't have intelligence. How much harm could he do? A human being who wants to be a bad person, if they use their intelligence for evil, like we know what human beings could do, okay? Animals never created a Holocaust. So you understand that the human evil is capable of terrible things. So he says that this is the meaning when the Gemara says Shadin and Lilin and whatever, it means people who are demons. In other words, the way, people say get rid of their demons. You have a person who's just a terrible person, who's dumb, unintelligent, and evil, or some combination of all of that, and this is what it means. So you see here, Rambam as well, going with the metaphor type of option. And because of this, there's a famous passage of the Gra, where the Gra, the Rebbe Eliyahu of Vilna, who lived in the times of the Alter Rebbe and passed away in 1797, Sukkot's time, he has a very famous passage. But to understand the background and this passage, he lashes out at the Rambam. And he's very upset at the Rambam. And he says the Rambam denies that demons exist. Really, there are others too, but he picks on the Rambam. And we know why he picks on the Rambam, because the Rambam is the top. So, but where does this come about? Because the Rambam has a din, and this din is quoted in Shulchan Aruch. And the din is that if someone is bitten by a scorpion on Shabbos, you're allowed to do a lachash. So lachash is you're allowed to go to the bite and you're allowed to start whispering things to it with the hope that whispering could remedy the situation.
Why would it be found to do that on Shabbos?
I don't know. Refuah, the Gzeira v'Chachama about refuah. Yeah. Then he says, "Afal pi she'ein adavar moil klum." No, it doesn't help anything. It's ridiculous. Hoylam esukanu hutira kedei shalei titarav daita elav. Placebo, 100%. And the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, brings it word for word from the Rambam. The Gra wrote small comments on the Shulchan Aruch. In fact, it's pretty much the only thing. One of the only things we have from. There's a lot of svarim from the Gra, but they're not his. He wrote something. His students wrote based on what he wrote, or his students heard a shir and they wrote. The Gra's comments to the Shulchan Aruch, that's his own handwriting, and they wrote and they published them. And look at what he writes on this halacha. V'afal pi, meaning afal pi, where the Shulchan Aruch says she'ein adavar klum, in adavar moil klum, says the Gra. Where does this come from? This comes from the Rambam. Then he says, if you look in Pirush HaMishnah, you'll see that also there he denies that demons exist. Everyone who came after him disagreed. Okay, that's an exaggeration. Not everyone who came after him disagreed. Some people disagreed. Because the Gemara always speaks about lachash. Again, we're moving to a little bit of a separate subject. Right now is the issue of whispering a remedy to heal someone. Look at this line. Rambam was drawn achar ha-philosophia ha'arura, after the cursed philosophy. V'lechein kasav, and therefore he wrote shekshafim, that magic, v'shemois, using divine names to accomplish things, v'lachashim, that we were just talking about that, v'shedim, demons, v'kameas is when a person would wear an amulet where it's supposed to protect the person from either a shade or an ayin hara, for either one of the two. Hakoilu sheker. That's why he wrote it's all a lie. But he was already hit on the head by other rabbis before me who said you're wrong. Because we find many stories in the Gemara that have to do with uttering the divine name or by magic. And here in the ellipses, I took out the places where he brings examples. And in fact, in Sefer Shmos, we see that a stick turned into a snake. So don't tell me magic doesn't exist. And we see a lot of the concept of amulets. The lachashim and the concept of a lachash. Rabu milisapar is too innumerable to count. Philosophia hitasoi beroiv likcha. The philosophy made him stray, and he uses here a pasuk from Mishlei that talks about a woman who's a zayna, and it says beroiv lekcha, with her smooth talking, she convinces a man to do a sin, and that's what he's saying here. Lefarash Gemara, and he explains the Rambam is saying the Gemara hakol b'derech halatzai, everything as a metaphor, v'lakar es mipashtan mipshutan, and taking it away from the literal meaning. V'chas v'shalom eini ma'ameh behem. I don't believe in this whole approach. V'loy mehem v'loy ma'amonim. That's a pasuk in Yecheskel. I don't want from them. I don't want from their masses. Elokal hadvarim en kipshutan. It's all literal. Elosh ben pnimius. Also, it's pshutan. Yeshban Pnimius. That's a little more of the way Chassidus usually explains things. Literal level is true, but there's also depth. There's also something behind it. I'm not meaning the deeper meaning that the philosophers give, which is not Pnimius, that's Chitzonius. I'm saying from the Mekubalim. The Gra was a big Mekubal, and he endorsed Kabbalah, and that's what he's referring to over here. Now, about this passage of the Gra, very interesting. First of all, there were those who came out and said, no, it's not from the Gra. He didn't write it. He wouldn't have written about the Rambam this. Okay, the first print where this was printed by the students, they write over there that they took Bezeh HaLashon. There's no evidence that it's from someone else. And later, in one of the prints that they made in the 1870s in Russia, the Vilna printers, they actually took out some of the words, like Harura. They took out some of the words because it was too sharp. But the standard Shulchan Aruch today, the new prints, have this Kamoshahu without it being edited. And so in summary, what do you see so far? What you see is, again, as I said, with other paranormal phenomena, it's very similar. Chazal, you see acceptance of the idea with an important qualification. I want to come back to this. With an important qualification, just like you have in other things. They don't have power over you, they can't control you, right? Because only God, Hashem Echad, is one force, and therefore you have nothing to gain by talking to them or worshiping them. But that's pretty much Chazal. And most of the Rishonim aligned themselves with that. But the Rishonim like Rambam, Radak, Ralbag, Meiri, those who are more geographically, they're from Spain and Provence. Philosophically, they're more in line with Chakira. So they tended to go in another direction and to interpret the Chazals either in the two ways that I showed you before. Okay. Now, in this topic, there's another thing that's important. That is, there's a few traditions about they used to exist, but not anymore. So let's go through this briefly. There's actually a little bit of a history here. This goes back already to the Gemara. The Gemara itself, in the Maseches Pesachim, where it talks about these issues and where it talks about Zugais, it says over there that Abaye once had a conversation with a demon, and the demon said to Abaye, if only God let me, I would hurt you. Something to that effect, which endorses and emphasizes Ramban's point before that they don't have power over people. And then Abaye said that the lashon of the Gemara is that he's like, oh, so in other words, Hashem likes me because he's saying that you can attack me. So if Hashem really likes me, I'm making a gzeira that shaloi savoiri b'yishuv la'olam, that you should never come into a human habitation. So you should only live on the margins of the world, never in a human society. The Gemara then asks, but we see that sometimes they're still here. It says, yeah, it's a derech arai only once in a while, but for the most part, they're not here anymore. So that's the beginning of this thing, and there are another few examples of this as we'll see. So that's number one. Number two is a famous teaching from the Kotzker. The Kotzker, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotz, the first founder of the Kotzk dynasty. He has a teaching that says, where people asked him, the Rambam said demons don't exist, but Chazal say they do. So what? How do you reconcile this? So he said, the Rambam is a posik. When he paskined and he said that Shadim don't exist, so then their Metzias was in this battle, and their Metzias went away. It's a famous vart that's kind of from the Kotzker. So that's another, it's more extreme. The Gemara is only that they can't come into a human civilization. Here it's more extreme, that Pasha he was Mavatal them, that the Rambam was Mavatal them. And this is quoted by many Sfarim or whatever. The Rebbe once said a sikha about Kishif. Hold on. Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there. Hold on. So that's number two. Number three is a story about Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. So Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, this is a story that the Frierdiker Rebbe has in his Zichronos. In his Zichronos, in volume 2, he has in a story a maisa about Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem lived in the 1600s. He has over there all maisa. The truth is that this same story is in an earlier sefer called Kava Yashar. Kava Yashar is a famous Musar sefer that was printed already in the late 1600s by a man named Tzvi Hirsch Kadaner. And it's an interesting Musar sefer. And he has a same story, Yoel Baal Shem. He can tell us the same story, but there are differences in the details. But the Nakuda of that story is that there were demons that took over a house in Posen. And the reason they took over a house in Posen, here's where you get into differences between the two versions. In the Kava Yoshar's version is because the man had relations with a shade, and so therefore he had children, and so those children from the shade were Yarshim, so they claimed ownership of the house, and so therefore they decided that they're living there. The Frierdiker Rebbe, when he says the story, just says that the person was doing Avedis, doesn't get into the specifics, and so they brought the Christians to see if they could get the demons out. They couldn't get the demons out. And Yoel Baal Shem came and he said that you have to leave because you need to be outside of human civilization. However, if you learn these stories and these sources, there's nothing new. There's no new Gzeira that's being made. They're just referring back to the fact that the Gemara already said that your place is not to be amongst human beings. So nothing new. I'm not aware of anything new in these two sources. We don't have anything new about this area. However, there is one more thing, and that is from the Munkacher. The Munkacher writes in one of his Sfarim, his Lashon is that the Baal Shem Tov used to use demons for his purpose, but then Atsha B'Soif he writes Loi Ratza Klal B'Shlichusam V'Erchikam Legamri Min HaYishuv V'Erchikam Legamri Min HaYishuv. So here again, not that he was Mavatal them, but he sent them away from the Yishuv. This is not Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. This is the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidus. That he was merachik them legamri min hayishuv, not that they don't exist. So these are 3 or 4 different teachings along the same lines about the idea of they exist, but someone came along and made a change and introduced a change into this area in that regard. Okay, now let's continue. Here, all of this, in a sense.
But who was the one that originally? Who was the one that Taka said it?
So the first one is Abaya. Abaya says
the recent, the 1300.
No, they were.
The Rambam.
The Kotzker said that the Rambam, when he said they don't exist, that was it caused that they shouldn't exist anymore. That's a Kotzker's chap. Okay. Now, all of this is an important topic, Kishalatzma, but it's also introduction to later in the parsha. Later in the parsha, we have the Isurei Arayas. And the Isurei Arayas play a role with demons as well. In the end of Parshas Achrei Mos, we learn about the Isur of Eishes Ish, that a man should not have relations with a woman who's married. And the lashon of the Torah is Eishes HaMitzcha, to the wife of your neighbor, your friend. Lo yisitein shchavtach al hazara, you shouldn't have relations with Tamava and thereby defile her. Then it also says that a man should not have relations with an animal. In English, the word is bestiality or bestiality. And a woman should not have relations with an animal as well. This is clearly stated in Parshas Achrei Mos. Now, this is very relevant because of the Shut Maharam Lublin. when we were in yeshiva, you started your foray into learning commentaries on the Gemara. The first commentary you learned was Rashi. Maybe the second one was Tosfos. The third one was Marsha, and Maram. Okay, so either third or fourth. So Maram, who's this Maram? Maram is a mayor of Lublin. You see his dates here, 1558 to 1616. Obviously Lublin in Poland. Big Rav, big posek at this time. He also has a tshuva, a set of tshuvas, a svarim, meaning a shalos of tshuvas. And he has over here a shaila. What's the shaila? The shaila is, there was a woman who committed adultery. But guess what she says? She says it wasn't with a man. She says it was with a demon. They even give the name of a demon that was popular belief at that time. And so the shaila is with the halacha. Right? Is a woman, is that considered like adultery or not? And there's nafkaminas on halacha, as we'll see inside. So let's see what Maram Lublin says. Asher nidrashti mamalas kvoi toirasai. The question came in, a bizarre, crazy story. But it's a real story, a story of Maisa Shaya. Okay, so this is the name. It's never mentioned in Chazal, this thing, but it was a popular belief in Poland at that time. She showed up once looking like her husband. Shnia kidmus paretz came looking like a paretz. A married woman. Is she usher to her husband? The din is that if a married woman willingly has relations with another man, she now is not allowed to be married to her husband anymore. Willingly, if she did it willingly. If it's a kohen, it's even worse. If it's a kohen, even if it's against her will, she can't be married to her. So, and if it was ba'inus, what would be the din? If it's a kohen, that's a shaila over here. So do you say that, if it was willing, and it's Yisrael, divorce. If it's a kohen, either way, divorce. Or, maybe you say that a demon is not like a human. A demon is more like an animal. What's the din if a woman, a married woman, Chas v'shalom, had relations with an animal? So it's not allowed. But she's not also a baila. So do you compare it to that? Why? Because a woman doesn't have the din. She doesn't come the din of Zaina, the halachic category of Zaina, doesn't happen through bestiality. Or maybe you say, no, we should treat it like a human, because it looked like a human. So as the saying goes, if it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, right, quacks like a, so it looks like a human. And demons also have children. This is based on a Gemara. One of the many passages in the Gemara about demons says that they amongst themselves have sexual relations and have offspring. So this is his two signs. Tshuva, what's his answer? I would like to compare it to the case of a woman who had relations with an animal. I don't care the fact that demons can have children or not. You have to be a human. Why? Because the pasuk says by Saita v'shachav ish oisa. It says, and a man lied with her, and so behemo v'ruach le'mikrisha. Animal is not a ish, a ruach is not a ish, a demon is not a ish. It's a longer tshuva. I'm just giving you a very small selection of this, and this is psak din. So in other words, you have over here a story where it seems like there was some sort of adultery that occurred. I guess it's normal to wonder. One option is the woman the woman was under the impression that it was a demon. Another option is the woman just made it up. It's also possible that, how would you know? I don't. A little bit of a concern that I have with this type of tshuva is, where does this end? So basically, any time a woman had relations with a man, she could just always say that it was a demon. How do you prove one way or another? I'm not entirely sure. But he was really ugly. I don't know. It doesn't speak about any children. But yeah, I hear you. I don't know. Okay, now, he's not the final word.
Why is Peru shy? Why does that make it an issue?
Yeah, they're just trying to know, should we consider this like a person or not? So on the one hand, it looked like a person.
Yeah, animals also.
Yeah. That's true. And they'll also do Peru. That's true. Oh, no. But it's more than that. I think it's not only Parim V'Rav and Kivnei Adam. I think it also means that from the Gemara, it's mashma that a human being having relations with a demon, they could have children. Yeah. Whereas a human being and an animal cannot have children, cannot have offspring. So that would be an argument to say that it is adultery. If you have a child together, so then it's like a real thing. That's what I think he means. Even though his lashon is Uparim V'Rav and Kivnei Adam, I think he means interbreeding. Okay. Now, other Rabbanim disagreed. In the next generation, you had Reb Chaim HaKohen Rappaport. He's famous for the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, together with a famous Rabbi Rappaport. It's him. He was a big Rav in Lvov at the time, and he was related to Maram Lublin because he calls him his Alta Zayda. And he writes over here that my Alta Zayda says that it's okay. He doesn't see it as a problem. And he's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. He's like, I think the fact that the fact that a human being and demon could have a child together, that should be a persuasive factor that tells us that it is going to be adultery. That's what Reb Chaim HaKohen Rappaport says. It ends up being a machlokes between Maram Lublin and Reb Chaim HaKohen Rappaport. The Chidah got involved in a case as well. And he describes here a whole arichistic case that there were women and they went together to a place and they were not feeling well, so they're feeling better, and they did this whole ritual, and then all of a sudden a man appeared before them and it was a demon, and things happened, and so what's the din? And he brings the earlier sources, and he goes on the side of Maram Lublin, and he says these women, they're mutter lebaleim, it's not a problem, even if they're a kohen. And he brings a raya from the Yerushalmi. What's the raya from the Yerushalmi? Once upon a time, you have an old man. Ma'isa b'chosid echad. The lashon of the Yerushalmi is who learned the passage that says al tameh ba'atzmacha ad yom ziknusecha. Don't believe in yourself until even when you're in old age. Don't. And our lashon and Pirkei Avos is al tameh ba'atzcha ad yom moisach. Don't believe in yourself till the day you die. But in other words, never feel you're immune from doing an avera. But then he said, but not me, I'm different. And then it says that a demon came, presented herself as a woman to him. They had relations, and then he felt all guilty. And then he said, oh, don't worry, it's fine. I'm not a human, and I'm only a demon. She's like, what do you mean, don't worry? It shows you that there's no isser here. Because the lashon is, oh, don't worry, I'm only a demon. If it's don't worry, I'm only a demon, it shows you there's no isser. If there's no isser, so then I support Maram Lublin that there's no problem the other way around as well. Yeah, he discusses that in his tshuva. I didn't quote that part. Yeah, and then there's another ma'isa. It's just a little bit unbelievable how much you have of this. Later in the 1800s, Reb Chaim Sofer is an Einokov and Lechsam Sofer in his tshuvas Machane Chaim. He has another case, and there's also another thing. A man, it was a crazy story he describes over there. There were men, they were walking in the middle of the night, they saw something, they weren't sure what it was, they had, it looked like a pillow on the street, they were scared to touch it, they just started to stab it, and they stabbed it, and then all of a sudden they heard a noise, and then a few minutes later a woman appeared before them and said, you just killed the demon that was having relations with me for a number of years, but don't tell anyone. And she made them all swear that they're not going to tell. So now they can't. They wanted to know, we made a shvuah not to tell, but maybe we need to tell. So he says, no, don't tell. Why? Because there's no isser, there's no problem, and there's no asr labaila and anything like this. So this is there are others, but these are some of the main shuvas that are on this side. So you see how much the idea of if you accept that demons exist and you accept that they're hanging out once in a while, at least, if not more often, within our midst, then these are examples of taking it 100% literal, these concepts. And they don't seem to take into consideration the idea that they're not part of the yishuv anymore. Like, if you take the Gemara about Abaye, say, what do you mean? Abaye said they can't be part of the yishuv, so they're not part of the yishuv. So maybe once in a while they come. Okay, but Torah goes basar roiv, so sorry, it wasn't a demon. No, none of these places can go in that direction. In other words, they seem to minimize the Gemara that says they're not part of the yishuv. These poskim seem to not take it all that seriously. That's what it seems to me, at least. Okay, let's conclude by a few passages of Chassidus on this topic. First of all, in Tanya Perek Ches is, I think, the only place in Tanya where the Alter Rebbe talks about Shadim. And guess what? It's very interesting. He says like this. He says that when a Yid has a taiva for a Isser, that Shadin, it's a shade mishadin nuchroin. That's a non-Jewish shade, and here he uses the word shadin. And he says this is a goyish yetzahara, a non-Jewish yetzahara. And then he says, but when a yid has a taiva for a davar amuter, that's a Jewish shade. Shade mishadin yudain. That's a shade of Jewish shadin. Where is this language coming from? It comes from the Zohar. The Zohar talks about shadin yudain and shadin uchrain, Jewish shadin and non-Jewish shadin. However, it's very interesting to note the Zohar in Parshas Pinchas, it's very different there and when the way the Alter Rebbe here, and I think it's a little telling. In Zohar Parshas Pinchas, he describes just like you have amongst human beings. You have Jewish human beings and non-Jewish human beings. So amongst Shadim, you have Jewish Shadim and non-Jewish Shadim. It's not talking about the Nefesh at all. It's not talking about the Yetzer Hara at all. It's talking Pashat about the demon. And he says, some Shadim are big Talmid Chachamim, and some know how to learn, and some are this. You have Yidden, you have guys it comes Alter Rebbe, uses the same language, but all what? All in the human being. All in the human being. In our daily experiences, in our daily challenges. When we have a taiva for a davar aser, that's a concept of shedin uchroy. When we have the taiva for a davar amuter, that's a concept of shedin yehudoin. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying there's no denial of anything by the Alter Rebbe. But what you have here is what does Chassidus Chabad focus on? Chassidus Chabad doesn't focus on shedin as beings that exist or whatever. They exist. Of course, I don't think the Alter Rebbe denies it. I have no reason to believe that he does. He accepts it 100%. But what's relevant? What do we talk about? These topics are relevant in as much as they play out in the human life, in the human sphere. And in that way, yeah, there is, where Shadim is relevant? Shadim is relevant in our personal life. As the Meir, he said before, Mazikin is the Yetzer Hara. The Alter Rebbe is saying that's the only time the Alter Rebbe talks about it in time. That's number one. Number two, there's a Maimon in Torah A. Very interesting Maimon. And the Rebbe asks a question. His question is, why are demons so bad? We always say they're so bad, so terrible. Why are they so bad and so terrible? At the end of the day, they're always following what the Eibishter is saying. Remember that we learned from the Ramban earlier, they have no power, right? And we saw earlier, they told Abaya, I can't hurt you, I want to hurt you, but I can't hurt you. Why? Because God doesn't let. So here are beings that are completely bottled to Hashem. Anything they do is what the Eibishter says. Bittul. These people, they should be given the biggest awards, Mr. Bittul. Human beings, sometimes we're supposed to do something and we do the opposite. So they're higher than us, he asks. So why do we call them Mansikin? And he goes on to say something very interesting. He says like this, at the end of the day, you want to know what Kedusha is and Klippas? Kedusha is not adherence. Kedusha is not adherence. Because if it is, that means Shadim are better than you. Kedusha is not adherence. Kedusha is Kiruv to Ein Sof. Obviously, if you're Bikirov La'Ein Sof, if you're in a close, warm, intimate relationship with God, so by definition, you're going to listen to everything that He's saying. But it's not, what's a shade? A shade doesn't feel God, is most very distant from God, isn't interested, but he has no choice. He has no choice. Why? It's almost like the concept of Yiras Oynish. I don't want to do this, but I'm afraid you're going to punish me, so I need to do it. So he says, so yeah, that's a mazik. That's a mazik mentality. That's terrible. We don't want, that's not Kedusha. Kedusha isn't, well, I did everything the way you told me to do it. That's not Kedusha. Kedusha is a relationship with the Eibishter. You're close to the Eibishter. Neshamas are close. So we may make a mistake. And we may not be the best at bittul. We may not do everything exactly the Eibishter wants. But you know something? The things that we do, we're not doing because of Yiras Oynish. We're not doing because we're doing it because we want to have a relationship with the Eibishter. We're close to the Eibishter. So I was thinking when I'm learning this chelek of Torah or Yisroi, it's something to think about. It's like there's two different types of relationships with God. There's a demonic relationship with God. Demonic is, I may do everything in the book, but I don't care for you. I don't want you. Stay far away. That's the blessing for the Tsar. May God keep that the Tsar should be far away from us. Some people have that attitude about God. I'll do whatever he says. I'll do everything, but keep him far away from me. I don't want anything to do with him. Sorry, that's a demonic relationship with the Eibishter. A human relationship with the Eibishter is, I may not get everything right, but I want to have kiruv l'Ein Sof. I want to be close to God, and I want to feel His presence. And as a result of that feeling, I'm also going to do the things that He wants. A whole different mentality. So we need to make sure that our relationship with the Eibishter is along those lines, where it is a human relationship rather than a demonic one.
You don't feel like the Alter Rebbe by saying this is kind of endorsing the opinion that it's just the Yetzer Hara?
No, I don't think so. I think that, as I said before, I think the Alter Rebbe is very focused on making things relevant to people, and so here he's making these concepts relevant. But the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, by the way, says in one or two places that, this custom of you pour water to spill the top, he says, because we're afraid that the water came from a river and the Shadim drank from it and they put their poison into the river, and this is the way to get it out. So and the Alter Rebbe brings that in Shulchan Aruch. I have no evidence to suggest that the Alter Rebbe is not accepting demons, but I do think that Chassidus Chabad here, as elsewhere, there are other examples of this, and where it says, okay, you have all that stuff, yeah, but what do we want to focus on? What is important for us to think about, and what is the stuff relevant to us, to our people? So that's that. So we begin with a pasuk in this week's parsha about not bringing karbanos that are seirim, and we saw a whole raid in Jewish sources about what these seirim are. with multiple perspectives, accepting the thing or rejecting, which invokes either metaphor or the other approach that the Meiri gave, and then we saw how Chassidus explains that we need to focus on our life and not living a demonic relationship with the Eibishter, but rather one that is more human in nature. All right.
You said 25?
Huh?